There's something horribly wrong with the kids in my neighborhood. As soon as I opened the front door that Friday afternoon, I knew that my daughter Aaliyah wasn't at home. The house had a sort of dusty stillness to it that her 8-year-old presence usually blew up with the force of an atomic bomb. "Honey?" I called down the hallway, but there was no answer. I was starting to get really worried now, worried in a way that only a newly married, first-time parent can be. I wasn't even really sure what I was afraid of, but it suddenly felt like a chunk of sharp ice had been stabbed into the center of my chest. Only the force of habit made me stop and remove my shoes before I began to search the house. "Honey?" I tried again. After checking the first floor, I went upstairs to the bedrooms. My wife Caroline's phone, wallet, and key ring were still on her nightstand. Her white SUV was in the driveway, but she hadn't left one of her cute, doodle-covered notes on the fridge for me. Where the hell could everyone have gone? I was scratching my head and making a second loop of the house when the patio door slid open. "Caroline." I breathed for the first time in what felt like 10 minutes, then asked her what had happened. My wife explained that Gabe Marenthal, one of Aaliyah's playmates from down the street, was having a birthday party. It was just a 10-minute walk from our place to the Marenthals, and Caroline had expected to be back before I got home. Of course, with kids, nothing was ever quick or easy, and the short trip had ended up taking over an hour. I was just relieved that she was safe. We had lived in this neighborhood for less than a year, but so far it seemed like exactly the sort of secure, out-of-the-way place we had been looking for. It was bordered on 3 sides by forest, and apart from that, there was nothing around apart from a few warehouses, a pharmaceutical plant, a grocery store, and a gas station. There were plenty of other families nearby, too. The Marenthals, the Tremoses, the Redmonds at the end of the street, and the Overtons. Just thinking of the name put a nasty taste in my mouth. "Is Leander going to be there?" I asked reluctantly. My wife grimaced and told me that every kid in the neighborhood had been invited. We both knew that that meant none of the Overtons had ever missed a chance at a free meal. When I first met the Overtons, I thought that my dislike for them was purely aesthetic. They dressed like slobs, let junk pile up in their yard, and argued at the top of their lungs for the whole street to hear. I had told myself not to be judgmental, to remember that not everyone experienced the same advantages that I had enjoyed. But getting to know the family better only confirmed my prejudice. One Sunday morning, I had come downstairs after my shower to find Leander Overton sitting on my kitchen floor, eating strawberry ice cream from the carton with a spoon. Apparently, he and some other children had been playing with Aaliyah in our backyard when he decided to come in and help himself to whatever he wanted from the refrigerator. "This stuff sucks," Leander had shouted, instead of saying hello. "Buy vanilla instead." Then, after Aaliyah had a minor dental surgery later that week, I found her crying on the front porch. Leander had told her that her mouth looked like she'd lost a fight with a pair of pliers. The boy was rude, crude, and had a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush. I would have loved to ban Aaliyah from playing with him completely, but none of the other neighborhood parents were willing to do the same. It seemed that if I wanted Aaliyah to have friends, Leander was the price I would have to pay. "Maybe I'll take a walk over there," I sighed, turning back to my shoes. Caroline grabbed my arm. I was being a helicopter parent, she warned, and besides, it was the Marenthals, the most thoughtful, well-ordered family on the block. Any birthday party they hosted was sure to be a safe one, with the children closely supervised at all times. My wife's words died in her throat, but only after I looked over my shoulder did I understand why. Smoke was drifting above the trees behind our house, and it was coming from around the same area where the Marenthals lived. Moments later, I could smell it as well, a bitter, chemical odor that proved it was no wood fire or out-of-control barbecue. Caroline and I exchanged a glance and hurried to put on our shoes. As I fumbled with my laces, I dialed Susan Marenthal's number. No answer. Maybe, I told myself, the fire had nothing to do with the kids, but I had to see for myself. "Stay here," I told Caroline. "One of us needs to be in the house in case Aaliyah comes home, or I might need you to get the car. Keep your phone handy," I reassured her with a kiss on the cheek. "It'll be all right." It was harder to convince myself. The pillar of smoke that was rising into the evening sky looked even more ominous from the street, and I found myself running rather than walking toward the Marenthals. The sun was setting, but the evening was still humid, and sweat had pooled on my chest by the time I reached the end of the street. In the back of my mind, I was vaguely aware of a thwack-thwacking sound that reminded me of an axe chopping wood. I wasn't sure, however, until a telephone pole up ahead went down like a felled tree. There was a spark and a boom from its transformer, then every light in the neighborhood went out at once. The sudden gloom was disturbing, but not as disturbing as what accompanied it, the gleeful, almost maniacal laughter of several young kids. I slowed my pace to a walk, suddenly afraid for reasons I couldn't explain. The windows of the houses on either side of me were all dark and quiet. It was strange, I thought, that no one had come outside to look for the source of the smoke or the outage. Something whizzed by my head. I froze, then barely ducked in time as another object flew my way. A white-hot burst of pain exploded in my knee. The third one had found its mark. It was a rock. "Hey," I shouted. "Who's throwing stones?" There was no response, and then another barrage of stones zipped my way. I cursed, ducked, and scrambled for cover. From somewhere in the darkness I heard a childish giggle. I brought a hand to my forehead. It was sticky with blood. Whoever was out there, they had gotten me good, and Aaliyah was out there too. I squinted out from behind the wood fence where I'd taken cover. There was no sign of the stone throwers, but there was still a whole nother street between me and Marenthal's. I was just about to get moving again when I heard a hiss from the shadowy porch beside me. PSST, a gravelly voice hissed, "Get over here and stay down." I could barely make out the shape of an elderly man laying flat on his stomach and beckoning to me. It reminded me whose house I was crouched in front of. Mr. Lau's. The old man was known throughout the neighborhood for keeping his home and yard spotless. Under other circumstances, he probably would have been yelling at me to get off of his lawn. After one last longing look toward the Marenthal's place, I crawled toward him. I needed to reach Aaliyah as quickly as possible, but there was a chance Mr. Lau had some information that I might need. He waved me inside, as though he couldn't wait to put a locked door between himself and whatever was happening in our neighborhood. "It's the kids," Mr. Lau whispered, as soon as I was in earshot. "They've all gone crazy." He explained that he had been weeding in his garden when he'd first heard the screams from the far end of the street. He had looked up to see a skinny boy with shoulder-length blonde hair walking into his garage. He had yelled at the child who I assumed was the Tremosa's son Aiden to stop. Instead, the long-haired boy grabbed a pair of shears from their hook on the wall and ran at Mr. Lau, laughing and snapping them together like a giant pair of scissors. The old man must have seen the disbelief on my face, because he pointed to the leg of his perfectly pressed pants. They were hacked and stained with blood in 3 places. "He's still out there," Mr. Lau warned me, his face pale, "and he's not alone." "I've got to go," I shook my head. "My daughter's out there too." As I sprinted through Mr. Lau's living room to sneak out through his patio door, the old man shook his head at me. "She might be," he muttered, "but she's not your daughter anymore." The last thing I saw before I left Mr. Lau was a short silhouette standing outside the frail, breakable glass of his front door. It was holding a pair of garden shears. I jumped off of Mr. Lau's balcony and winced as I landed hard on the sloping hill behind. My ankle ached, but nothing was broken, I hoped. I glanced left and right. The quiet suburban houses were just black shadows against the almost nighttime sky. Glass shattered. An orange glow appeared at the end of the block. Another house was ablaze. I pulled out my phone to call Caroline, but it had no bars. Had the kids somehow gotten to the cell towers, too? Just how far had all this spread? I limped into the forest that surrounded the neighborhood, staying within the tree line and looking nervously up the hill while I made my way toward the Marenthals. Like a scared animal, I felt safer in the shadows of the woods, but I couldn't stay hidden forever. After just a few more backyards, I would need to make a sprint across the road. In the pale glow of the rising moon, my familiar neighborhood looked twisted, unfamiliar, and wrong. I crept through the ferns and undergrowth until I was just a few feet from the asphalt. The coast appeared to be clear, until I saw another set of lights coming toward me, torches. Dozens of them. They were low to the ground and occasionally one would go sailing through the night sky, as though its holder was eager to set things on fire for fun. The torches were being carried by children. There was no sign of Aaliyah or Leander, but in the flickering orange light, I saw several faces I recognized. Natalia, the Tremosa's daughter, Eric, the Redmond's son, the twin Hernandez girls. What I didn't recognize, however, was the expression of cruel joy on every face. The kids had painted themselves with something that might have been blood, war paint, or both. They were dressed up like barbarians going to war, and maybe in a sense they were. After all, the children did have captives. The gruesome little band was marching Mark Tremosa and Talia Redmond along with them, keeping the 2 adults prisoner in the center of the group using a collection of sharp tools. Based on their wounds, Mark and Talia had put up a fight at first. It looked like they were being taken in the same direction that I was going, toward the Marenthal house. I began to creep out of the ferns to follow them, then froze. One of the torch-carrying children kept turning around, scanning the street behind the group. They had a rear guard. How the hell was a band of kids this organized? I had to wait until they were almost out of sight before I made my move. The devastation was even worse on this side of the street. Windows shattered, houses burning, a woman lying face down in her driveway, a puddle of blood beneath her. Was it because there were more families with children on this side of the street? I pushed the unsettling thought out of my head and kept moving. I had to find Aaliyah and get back to Caroline before it was too late. Soon I could smell even more smoke and see the largest fire yet. It was in the Marenthals' backyard, right where the birthday party was supposed to be. Streamers, balloons, and colorful decorations whipped in the hot wind that blew around the pillar of flame in their center. It was a mountain of furniture and other household items, soaked with gasoline and set ablaze. From where I crouched behind the Marenthals' rose bushes, I could see small, dark shapes running up to it and tossing more fuel into the blaze. Couch cushions, baskets full of laundry, anything that they could get their hands on. My blood ran cold when I realized that Mark Tremosa and Talia Redmond were also being led toward the fire. What had happened to these kids? And even worse, was Aaliyah somehow part of it? A small, grubby hand gripped my ankle. "Shh," a familiar voice hissed. "You're Aaliyah's dad, right? The kid with the screwed up teeth?" There was no maniacal glee in Leander's eyes. He looked scared, confused, and alone just like me. I nodded. "The other kids have all gone nuts," Leander whispered, as though it wasn't obvious. I didn't have time for this. "Is Aaliyah safe?" I demanded. "I dunno," Leander shrugged. "I just took off running. I grabbed the goods first, though." Leander unrolled his stained t-shirt and pulled out a fist-sized chunk of birthday cake, which he then stuffed into his mouth. In front of us, there was a bang and a fiery crash as another piece of furniture was flung into the fire. "SHHMNGGHBNGGBHCK, he said, through a mouthful of crumbs. "What?" I groaned. I said, "She might be in the pickup." "Duh. Are you deaf or something?" Leander went on to explain that there was an abandoned Prohibition-era truck in the woods that the kids liked to play in. Pushing my fears about tetanus and black widow spiders out of my mind, I asked Leander if he could show me where it was. Sure, he told me. What's it worth to you? There was an odd new smell in the smoky air. Talia Redmond began to scream. I sighed and pulled out my wallet. Despite the nightmare going on around us, Leander wouldn't budge until I offered him all the cash I had. The shrieks behind me were getting louder, and the children had begun some sort of weird, shuffling dance. For all I knew, more bands of rock throwers were still out there, hunting for stragglers like me. Leander stuffed the crisp billfolds into the back of his shorts and waved for me to follow. I'd always thought of Leander as a sort of pudgy, unathletic bully, but the kid moved with the speed and grace of a panther, rolling his eyes whenever he had to wait for me to catch up. He was headed downhill, toward a sewer runoff canal at the back of the neighborhood. It smells like skunk's butthole down here, Leander informed me cheerfully, but there are some cool bugs if you know where to look. And this is where we found all those weird pills. I pinched the bridge of my nose and was about to ask Leander what he meant, but he had already launched into his story. So me, Ali, and Gabe had met at the pickup like usual, right? Only this time there was, like, this black box inside. Like in a freaking spy movie. Gabe wanted to leave it alone, but me and Ali opened it. There were 2 tubes of pills inside, one white, one yellow. Please tell me that you didn't take any of them. Course I did. I took one of each. Your daughter dared me to. She dared Gabe too, but he started sneezing real bad after he took the yellow one, so he pussied out. Gabe always pussies out. There wasn't much time to bust his balls about it, though, cause this guy in a suit showed up, walking back and forth like he was looking for something. He seemed real mad. Course, we hid. Daddy says when a guy in a suit comes looking for you, it's never for nothing good. Gabe had taken 1 pill, the others had taken 2. Gabe has gotten sick, Aaliyah and Leander were fine. Was that what the pills had contained, then? Some sort of infectious disease, and its cure? All of the neighborhood kids had been at Gabe's birthday party, and wasn't a pharmaceutical warehouse located just on the other side of these woods? I shook on my phone's flashlight. Apparently I was headed back into the woods, and this time it was going to be a muddy, we'd-choked downhill slog. A cobweb stuck to my sweating forehead, something scurried across the back of my neck. Rough as it was, there was still a sort of path, one that the neighborhood kids had probably been using for generations. I could see the truck up ahead, a rusted-out behemoth with one tire sunk into the murky slime of the drainage ditch. It looked like the sort of vehicle that bootleggers might have used to run whiskey during Prohibition. I had no idea how it had gotten here, but one thing was clear, it stuck out like a sore thumb. Had someone been using it as a dead drop to smuggle experimental pills out of the warehouse? Was that what the man in the suit had been looking for, and what the neighborhood kids had stumbled upon? There was movement in the backseat of the truck. A dark shape crawled up onto the roof. I tensed, prepared for anything. Except what happened next. Dad? It whispered. It was Aaliyah. I threw my arms around my daughter. I hadn't realized it, but until that moment I hadn't really expected to ever see her alive again. We've got to get out of here, I whispered. Come on, let's go find your mom. Hey! I winced at the volume of the indignant shout from behind us. You're not going anywhere without me. Leander ran up and tugged on my sleeve. If I didn't want him to keep making noise, it seemed like I'd have to take him with us. When we got back to the street, the light from the great fire had dimmed. The neighborhood was eerily still. I wanted to believe that it was finally over, but I knew better. The grimmer explanation was far more likely. The neighborhood was so quiet because all of the adults in it were dead, except for me. And what about my wife? What about Caroline? We lived a few blocks away from the Marenthals, but whatever this was, it had spread as quickly as breathing. Had she opened her door to some lost-looking child who had rang our doorbell, not noticing the blood-stained garden shears he was hiding behind his back? Or had the sound of shattering glass lured her out of the shower, only to find a gang of hip-high murderers standing in our bedroom, twirling their homemade weapons and looking up at her with sadistic glee? Despite the pain in my ankle, the thought made me move faster. I could feel the questions humming in Aaliyah's mind as she gripped my hand and hurried along beside me. Was Mom going to be okay? Was anything ever going to be okay again? Leander, meanwhile, was taking his time. He'd spotted something on the sidewalk, a discarded cough drop, maybe, and with a furtive look around, he stooped down, picked it up, and popped it into his mouth. I was turning back around in disgust when I saw the line advancing toward us. There were more than twice as many children as before. There was a sharp tool in every hand and an awful, vacant smile on every face. What they were doing reminded me sickeningly of rabbit hunting with my father, back when I was their age, moving slowly in formation, making a sweep that would catch any prey that had managed to escape so far. The group advanced slowly, step by step, with a coordination that should have been impossible for kids their age. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and bolt for the woods, but I fought down the urge. Doing so would mean abandoning Caroline. Just do it, the panic in my gut whispered, as the grim formation closed in. She's dead already, and you know it. All you're doing is lying to yourself and putting your daughter in danger. Aaliyah squeezed my hand even tighter. Even Leander looked up at me, wondering how I was going to get us out of this. The truth was, I had no idea. I was still trying to think of something when a familiar white SUV came crashing through the privacy fence up ahead. My wife lowered the automatic window and shouted for us to climb inside. How did you? I started to ask. The lights are out. The neighborhood is on fire. What did you expect me to do? Stay home? Hurry up and get in. Caroline didn't need to tell me twice. Our pursuers were already charging, their weapons at the ready. If we didn't get out now, we never would. I was barely through the door before Leander scrambled over top of me, shouting at my wife to go go go. Once Aaliyah was safely inside, she took his advice, circling back around through the gap she'd created. Our headlights were the only ones on the road, and the air was hazy with smoke. I wondered just how far this infection, if that was what it was, had spread. Had some classmate of Gabe's started feeling sick at the party and called for his parents to pick him up, spreading all this insanity to the rest of the town? Maybe even the rest of the state? I stared out the window, stroking Aaliyah's hair and listening to the hammering of my heart. How far would we have to drive before we saw the warm electric glow of civilization again? How long would it be until we saw any other survivors? A sudden jolt from below rocked the SUV. Leander muttered something about typical woman drivers as the tires went flat. I squinted out into the darkness, feeling like I was aboard a ship that had gone dead in the water. Someone was going to have to get out to see what had happened, and I knew who that someone would be. Warning everyone to stay put, I slipped gingerly out the door. In the red glow of the tail lights, I glimpsed a mesh of chains run through with nails and other jagged objects on the road beneath us. A homemade spike strip. A trap. Probably one of many. I shook my head at Caroline. She switched off the engine. No one seemed to be coming out of the lightless houses nearby to ambush us, not yet. Anyway, I climbed back into the SUV and took out my phone. To my surprise, I had service again. While Caroline stood watch, I called every emergency hotline I could think of, but all I got was a busy signal. I checked the online forums for our town, and what I found or didn't find was chilling. There were the usual posts about missing cats, porch theft, and a loud bang somewhere, but only up until about 8 p.m. After that, the net had gone silent. A gnawing sound from beside me nearly made me jump out of my skin, but it was just Leander. He had found a couple peanuts that had fallen between the seats. He wanted to know how long it was going to be before dinner. Aaliyah looked out the window thoughtfully. "We're gonna have to walk, aren't we?" she asked. We would, but not yet. First we needed to rest and prepare, and for the moment the inside of the SUV felt safe. While Caroline stood guard, Leander scrounged around for more food, and Aaliyah looked out the window. I opened a doc and started writing. If none of us make it out of here, I want to leave behind some kind of record, some evidence of what happened here. But as I prepare our bags and look out the window at the empty night, I can't help but wonder whether anyone will be left alive to read it.